The world doesn't break you. You break yourself against the world because you have not yet conquered the enemy within. You seek to command armies, to build empires, to bend the world to your will, but you remain a slave to the weakest parts of yourself. The whisper of doubt, the sting of insult, the siren call of easy pleasure, these are your true masters. You are a king with no kingdom, a wanderer in the ruins of your own potential. The man you see in the mirror is a stranger, a puppet whose strings are pulled by forces he refuses to see. You believe the battle is out there in the market, on the field, in the hearts of your rivals. You are wrong. The only war that has ever mattered is the one raging behind your own eyes. And until you win that war, every victory you achieve in the world will turn to ash in your hands. The journey outward is a fool's escape. The real conquest, the only one that will ever grant you the power you truly crave, begins with a terrifying stillness. It begins when the wanderer finally stops running from himself, turns, and faces the beast within. It begins when he decides to conquer himself first. The city was a monument to my own hollowness. Every towering skyscraper reflected a version of a man I was pretending to be. I moved through the crowded streets like a ghost, an empty suit animated by a relentless, pointless ambition. The people around me had a fire in their eyes, a purpose in their stride. I had only the cold, gnawing ache of a life lived on someone else's terms. For years, I had climbed, clawed, and fought my way up a ladder, never once stopping to ask if it was leaning against the right wall. I had mistaken the noise of achievement for the feeling of fulfillment. I had gathered all the trophies of a successful life: the sprawling apartment with its panoramic view of other people's lives, the luxury car that sat in traffic like a gilded cage, the network of so-called friends who knew my title but not my soul. But in the dead of night, when the city's roar subsided to a low hum, the silence in my apartment was a deafening scream. It was in that crushing silence that the truth would surface, ugly and undeniable. I was a fraud, an imposter in my own story. The applause I chased felt hollow because I knew I hadn't earned it. I was a ship with a powerful engine, a gleaming hull, and no rudder, tossed about by the chaotic currents of external validation and my own untamed impulses. My mind was a battlefield, a constant war between the man I wanted to be and the weak, undisciplined creature I was. I was a slave to my appetites, a puppet dancing to the tune of my own insecurities. The hunger for more approval, more status, more distraction, was an unquenchable fire that was burning my life to the ground. The day the illusion shattered was ordinary, which made it all the more brutal. It was a Tuesday, the air in the conference room thick with the familiar stench of desperation and stale coffee. Numbers flashed on a screen, voices droned on, but the only thing I could hear was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart. It was a rhythm of quiet desperation, a beat that counted down the seconds of my wasted life. Someone asked me a question. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I opened my mouth, ready to deliver the smooth, confident lie the moment required, but nothing came out. The words were gone. The silence stretched, becoming a physical weight crushing me. The faces around the table morphed from expectant to confused, then to annoyed. In that horrifying, endless moment, the masks I had so carefully constructed disintegrated, and I saw myself with a soul-crushing clarity. I was nothing, a hollow shell, a collection of borrowed opinions and rehearsed gestures. The man they were all looking at didn't exist. The sheer exhaustion of maintaining the facade finally broke me. I pushed my chair back, the sound a shriek of surrender, and I walked out. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't utter a single word of explanation. I just walked. I walked past the receptionist, through the gleaming lobby, and out onto the cold, indifferent pavement. I walked until my tailored shoes were scuffed and my lungs burned with the raw city air. I walked until the symphony of my failed life faded into the anonymous noise of the street. I was no longer a rising star, a man of importance. I was just a wanderer stripped bare, left with nothing but the raw, agonizing truth of who I was. The map of my life was gone. The path ahead was a terrifying, empty void. But for the first time in years, I felt a spark. It wasn't happiness. It was the terrifying, electric freedom of a man who has nothing left to lose. The conquest of the world had been a childish fantasy. The conquest of myself was the only war left to fight. I fled to the wilderness, seeking a silence that I hoped would quiet the storm in my head. I traded the relentless judgment of the city for the stoic indifference of ancient mountains. The cacophony of sirens and horns was replaced by the whisper of wind through pines, a language that spoke not to my ears, but to the deepest parts of my soul. I believed that in this solitude, stripped of all distraction, I would finally find the man I was meant to be. Instead, I found only the man I was. And the truth was uglier than I could have ever imagined. The silence of the wild did not quiet the noise within me. It amplified it. The ghosts of my past were my only companions, their whispers a constant reminder of my every failure, my every compromise, my every act of cowardice. I was haunted by the specter of my own squandered potential, a shadow that mocked me with every step I took. I had always considered myself strong, a master of my own universe. But here, in the unforgiving crucible of true solitude, I was forced to confront my own profound weakness. I was a creature of impulse, a slave to the whims of an undisciplined mind. My thoughts were a raging river, and I was drowning in their currents, dashed against the sharp rocks of my own making. I remembered a book I'd read in college, a dusty volume on Stoicism. I had dismissed its teachings as archaic, irrelevant to the modern world of cutthroat ambition. But here, with my world stripped down to its raw essentials, the words of those long-dead philosophers echoed with a terrifying relevance. No man is free who is not master of himself. That single sentence was a brand on my conscience. I was a prisoner. My entire life had been spent in a cage of my own design, a cage built from fear, desire, and the desperate need for the approval of others. My moods were a violent pendulum, swinging between the fleeting highs of external praise and the crushing lows of self-loathing. My desires were a relentless tide, pulling me further and further away from any shore of reason or self-control. I was a ghost ship on a stormy sea, captained by a madman. One day, driven by a hunger that had little to do with my empty stomach, I stumbled upon a small, isolated cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a fragile signal of life in the vast emptiness. On the porch sat an old man, his face a testament to a life lived on its own terms, a landscape of hard-won wisdom. He watched me approach without surprise, as if my arrival was an appointment he had been keeping for years. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, seemed to see not just the disheveled man standing before him, but the wreckage of the life I had dragged behind me. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask my story. He simply nodded toward an old wooden chair beside him. It was a silent invitation to a conversation my soul had been screaming for. "You're lost," he said, his voice as rough and steady as the ancient trees around us. It was not a question, it was a diagnosis. "I'm trying to find my way," I replied, my voice sounding weak and unfamiliar. He allowed a small, knowing smile to touch his lips. "You will not find it out here. The wilderness you need to explore is within you." This was the beginning of my unmaking and my remaking. The old man became my teacher, my guide, my tormentor. He offered no comfort, no easy answers. He offered only a mirror, a brutally honest reflection of the weak and broken man I had become. He taught me that the first step towards self-conquest is to understand the nature of the war you are fighting. The enemy was not my fear, my anger, or my desires. The enemy was my surrender to them. I had been a willing collaborator in my own imprisonment. I had handed the keys of my mind to every passing emotion, every external event, every opinion of every stranger. I had built the grand edifice of my life on the shifting sands of external validation, and then acted surprised when it all came crashing down. He spoke of the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind. He taught me that while the world could and would assail me with chaos and misfortune, the gates to this inner fortress were under my sole command. I could not control the storm, but I could control the ship. I could not control what others said or did, but I had absolute, unshakable control over my response. This, he explained, was the beginning and the end of all human freedom. The world could take my wealth, my status, my reputation, my very body, but it could never touch my will. It could never touch my ability to choose how I would meet my fate. This single idea was a spark in the darkness of my soul, the first glimmer of a power I never knew I possessed. I had been a wanderer my entire life, searching for a home, for a place of safety and belonging. But the only true home, the only unconquerable fortress, was the one I had to build within myself. The wanderer had finally found his true north. The war for my own soul had begun. The old man's lessons were not abstract theories. They were brutal, practical applications. He wouldn't just tell me about resilience. He would send me into the biting wind with a thin cloak and tell me to find warmth within my own spirit. He wouldn't just speak of mental discipline. He would give me a seemingly impossible task, like counting the leaves on a specific tree, forcing me to tame the wild horses of my own distracted mind. For days I would fail, my mind rebelling, screaming in frustration. I would curse him, curse the forest, curse the very air I breathed. And then in a moment of complete mental exhaustion, a strange quiet would descend. In that quiet I would begin to see. The frustration wasn't in the task, it was in my resistance to it. The anger wasn't in the cold, it was in my expectation of warmth. The weakness was not in my body, but in my mind's surrender to discomfort. These were not lessons, they were revelations. Each one was a brick, and with them I slowly, painfully began to build the walls of my inner citadel. He taught me the art of attention. Your mind is a garden, he would say, his voice a low rumble. If you do not intentionally cultivate flowers, weeds will grow in abundance. Your attention is the water and the sun. Where you place it, things will grow. I had been letting my garden grow wild, overrun with the weeds of anxiety, regret, and 1,000 trivial distractions. My attention was a scattered, squandered resource. He taught me to be the gatekeeper of my own mind. He taught me to observe my thoughts as a detached scientist observes phenomena, without judgment, without attachment. They were not me. They were simply mental weather, clouds passing through the vast, unchanging sky of my consciousness. This was a revolution. I was not the storm. I was the stillness that observed the storm. And in that separation, in that space between stimulus and response, I found a freedom I had never imagined. He introduced me to the most powerful weapon in the Stoic arsenal, the dichotomy of control, the simple, life-altering practice of distinguishing between what is within your power and what is not. A fool, he said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, is a man who wages war against the rain. A wise man is a man who builds a shelter. My entire life had been a war against the rain. I had exhausted myself fighting battles I could never win, trying to control the uncontrollable, the economy, the opinions of others, the past. He taught me to redirect my energy, to focus it with laser-like precision on the only territory I truly controlled, my own choices, my own judgments, my own actions. This was not a philosophy of passive resignation. It was the ultimate empowerment. It was the realization that my strength did not come from bending the world to my will, but from mastering my own. He preached the gospel of voluntary hardship. A man who has only known comfort is a man who has not yet met himself, he warned. Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. I had spent my life constructing a bubble of comfort around myself, avoiding pain, avoiding difficulty, avoiding anything that might test my limits. In doing so, I had made myself fragile, a bonsai tree in a world of ancient oaks. The old man deliberately shattered my bubble. He made me face the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion. He pushed me to the edge of my perceived limits and then forced me to take another step. And in the fire of that hardship, a new kind of strength was forged. I learned that discomfort was not my enemy, but my greatest teacher. I learned that the things I had once considered necessities were mere preferences. I was forging a new relationship with myself, one built not on the shifting sands of fleeting pleasure, but on the unshakable bedrock of tested, earned resilience. The wanderer was no longer aimlessly drifting. He was building his fortress, stone by painful stone. The old man was the living embodiment of his philosophy. He never spoke his name, and I never asked. He was more than a man, he was a force, a principle. His presence was a lesson in itself. There was a profound stillness about him, a deep and abiding peace that radiated from him like warmth from a fire. He was not a man devoid of emotion, but one whose emotions were his subjects, not his masters. He was not without fear, but he acted in spite of it. He was a man who had conquered himself, and in doing so, had become unconquerable. He was the master of his inner citadel, and from that place of unshakable strength, he moved through the world with a quiet grace and a formidable power. One evening, as the sky burned with the colors of a dying sun, he told me a story. It was about a young man full of fire and ambition who had set out to conquer the world. He achieved everything he desired, wealth, power, acclaim. But with each new acquisition he felt a growing emptiness, a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction. He had conquered kingdoms, but he had lost himself. As the old man spoke, a realization washed over me. He was not telling me a story. He was confessing his own. He was that young man. He was the wanderer who had walked the path I was now on, the path from the hollow victory of worldly conquest to the profound triumph of self-mastery. He was showing me that the end of my journey was not to become him, but to become myself. His final lesson was his most powerful. One morning I awoke to the profound silence of an empty cabin. He was gone. There was no note, no word of farewell. He had vanished as he had appeared, like a figure in a dream. A surge of panic, of a child's fear of abandonment, seized me. I was alone again. But then a deeper, calmer realization took its place. He had not abandoned me. He had set me free. He had taught me all he could. He had given me the tools, the principles, the weapons. The rest of the war was mine to fight. The student's journey was over. The warrior's journey had just begun. The old man had not given me a destination. He had given me a compass. The wanderer was no longer lost. He was on a path he would forge for himself, a path leading not to a place but to a state of being. The conquest had just begun. Returning to the city was like stepping onto a different planet. The relentless noise, the frantic, desperate energy of the crowds, it was a world I no longer belonged to. The ghosts of my past were still there, but they no longer had power over me. I saw them for what they were, empty phantoms, relics of a life that was not my own. The world had not changed, but my perception of it had been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. I was an island of stillness in a sea of chaos. I had once been drowning in that sea. Now I could walk on the water. I did not step back into my old life. The allure of the corner office, the siren song of status and wealth, was gone. Those were the desires of a different man, a weaker man. I found a small, simple apartment, a sanctuary of stillness in the heart of the storm. I filled my life not with things, but with purpose. I found work that was meaningful, that contributed something of value to the world, that was in alignment with the man I was becoming. I was no longer driven by the hunger for more, but by the quiet, steady pursuit of being more present, more virtuous, more master of myself. The city became my new training ground, my new wilderness. The daily commute was a dojo for practicing patience. A difficult colleague was a sparring partner for practicing forbearance. A sudden setback was an opportunity to strengthen my resilience. Every moment of every day was a chance to test the walls of my inner citadel. Sometimes the old habits would resurface. The ghosts of anger, fear, and desire would knock at the gates, but now I knew how to meet them. I was the gatekeeper. I could observe them, acknowledge them, and refuse them entry. I was no longer their prisoner. I began to write. I wrote about the journey, about the wilderness within, about the war that every man must fight. I wrote not as a guru with all the answers, but as a fellow wanderer sharing the map I had been given. I wrote about the inner citadel, the dichotomy of control, the transformative power of a disciplined mind. I wrote for the other lost souls, the other men who felt the gnawing emptiness of a life lived on the surface. And in sharing my struggle, I found a new and deeper purpose. The conquest of myself had become an act of service. The most profound change was not in my circumstances, but within myself. I had once seen the world as an adversary, a place of conflict and scarcity. Now I saw it as a gymnasium, a training ground designed for the strengthening of my own soul. I had once been a slave to my own shifting emotions. Now I was the master of my own inner world. I had not changed the world. I had changed myself. And in doing so, my entire world had been transformed. The wanderer had not conquered the world. He had conquered himself. And in that singular victory, he had found a power, a peace, and a freedom that no worldly empire could ever offer. He had found himself, and that was everything. This path of self-conquest is not a destination you arrive at. It is a daily practice, a moment-to-moment choice, a lifelong war. It is the hardest work a man can ever do, but it is the only work that truly matters. Because in the conquest of yourself, you find the only freedom that is real, the only peace that is lasting, the only power that cannot be taken from you. You become the master of your fate. You become the captain of your soul. You become the wanderer who has finally come home. The journey does not begin when you take your first step into the wilderness. It begins with a single, silent choice. The choice to stop running. The choice to turn and face the man in the mirror. It is the most terrifying choice you will ever make, but it is also the most rewarding. In conquering yourself, you conquer your world. Not the world of men and nations, but the world of your own experience. And that is the only conquest that has ever mattered. What is the battle you are refusing to fight? What is the inner wilderness you are afraid to explore? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, but the journey to self-mastery begins with a single declaration. I am responsible, I am in control. Claim that power, seize that responsibility, and begin the great and terrible adventure of your life, the conquest of you. The world is waiting for the man you have the potential to be. More importantly, you are waiting. Stop keeping that man a prisoner. The time to fight is now. The journey is yours. Begin. The world will sell you 1,000 cheap comforts, 1,000 easy distractions. It will tell you that happiness is a purchase away, that power is about dominating others, that success is a number in a bank account. This is the great lie of our time. True happiness is forged in the fire of self-discipline. True power is the quiet, unshakable mastery of your own mind. True success is the quality of your character. The path to this truth is not for the faint of heart. It is a path of relentless self-confrontation. It requires you to descend into the darkest parts of your own soul and do battle with the demons you find there. But this is the path that leads to a life of purpose, a life of meaning, a life of indestructible peace. Think of the men you truly admire. Are they the men with the most toys? Or are they the men with the most integrity? Are they the men who command the most attention? Or are they the men who command the most respect? The men who change the world are not the ones who conquer others. They are the ones who have first conquered themselves. They are the lighthouses. They are the fixed points in a spinning world. They are the living proof that the greatest victory is the one won in the silent battlefield of the soul. That potential resides in you. The seed of that greatness, that unconquerable strength is within you right now, but it will not grow on its own. It must be cultivated. It must be forged. The choice to begin that work is yours and yours alone. This is your war. This is your victory. So I ask you again, what is the wilderness you are wandering in? What is the unconquered territory within your own soul? The map is there. The compass is within you. The journey is waiting. Do not fear the darkness you may find, for it is only in the darkness that a man can discover his own light. It is only in the battle that he can discover his own strength. It is only in the conquest of himself that he can discover his own freedom. The wanderer who conquered himself first did not find a new world. He created one, so can you. The power is within you. The time is now. If this message resonates with you, if you feel the call to begin this journey, know that you are not walking this path alone. There is a brotherhood of men who are tired of the lies, tired of the weakness, tired of wandering. Share your first step in the comments below. What is the one battle you will choose to fight today? Your declaration may be the spark that ignites another man's courage. And if you are committed to this war, subscribe to this channel. Join this legion. The greatest adventure is the one within. It's time to begin the conquest.